Mech pilots, online. BattleTech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In our second deployment of BungleTech, we chat with Michael about how we play our games and why we play this way. Report on the death of a Zeus by a self-inflicted fist-to-face in our Battlefield highlight. Share a small yet important rule mistake we made recently, and read a sample of the short story Up Close, found in Shrapnel issue 11. It's time to hot load those LRMs, give a quick pray that our launchers don't get crit, and get this deployment onto the battlefield.
Primary objective, podcast topic segment, initiating.
Welcome, friends of BattleTech. I'm here again with the amazing, stupendous, wondrous Michael. Say hello, Michael.
Hello.
Oh, you didn't do it this time.
I didn't do it. You can't wear the bit too thin too early.
So today, me and Michael are here to discuss what our average BattleTech games look like, because I think we throw a lot of things in there. We're hoping that by sharing this and talking about this, it might give some ideas for your own games, or you might be able to share some ideas with us regarding how you play your games.
Yeah, honestly, our games are a pretty thick stew. You know, we just sort of throw everything in the kitchen sink in there, and we don't exactly know what's going to come out every time, but it's good fun.
Yeah, and I think that's really the emphasis of it all. It's good fun. If you're overheating, exploding, get headshot, can't get off the ground, if you're suffering, you're loving it. That's my philosophy of BattleTech. So, our average game consists of a few different elements. So I'm just going to list the elements, then we're going to go through them and discuss them and what they basically add to the game. So each of our games is constrained within battle value limits. We keep our games era open, so it can be any time period you want. We frame our games in a game mode or scenario. We assign pilot cards to people based on their mechs. We use the BattleTech initiative deck, and we as well draw a random map or somehow build a random map. We also use advanced rules that we like, and in some examples this means we'll ignore some of the more complicated advanced rules that just aren't worth it to us. And we have house rules. A few that we'll mention are direct blow and a lucky glancing hit. We can talk about those later. We also want to incorporate a feels bad rule. And this is something you hear about a lot when people are talking about BattleTech. It's a great game, it's really fun, but sometimes you can have really feels bad, crappy experiences playing it. So we're trying to come up with a rule that can mitigate that a little bit, just to keep the fun in there.
And to try and retain some of our players a little bit better, because if your first game you show up and you get headshot right out the gate, that's a real bummer of a time.
Yeah, exactly. Some people, unlike me, don't like to suffer. I don't understand how that can be possible. Isn't suffering what brings value to life, Michael?
No, C-bills bring value to life. That's what we're doing this for, right? Merc.
That's right. Let's make some C-bills. Okay, so let's start. So let's talk about battle value limits. So why do we use this, and what does it bring to the game, and how does it change the experience? Any opinions, Michael?
I mean, battle value is sort of the out of the box way to balance things. I'm not old enough of a BattleTech player to remember the days when things were just tonnage based, but as long as I've been playing, battle value 2.0 has been how we've done our balancing very roughly, and I think it's sort of the only tool that we really have for the we sort of structure our games generally as they're like pickup games almost. We don't necessarily know who all's going to show up. We're not running a guided campaign with a designated op for. We just show up as a couple groups of people that roll mechs against each other. So battle value is pretty much the only way we have to sort out what's a fair amount of metal to bring on each side.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think it's fairly simple and modifiable, which is nice. Like, if you just want to look at a record sheet, you want to get a 4-5 pilot, and it's that simple, and you just don't have the time to really think about things in more depth or don't want to, I just want to pilot this mech. Simple, easy to make a decision. But if you want to think about it more, you want to bring in crazy technology, you want to modify your pilot, all those calculations are built in and you can run the numbers yourself. And I think it is quite simple to do.
Yeah, and it's not too bad, like you say, you can just open up the record sheets. I guess it is a bit of a bummer having to thumb through sometimes dozens and dozens of sheets to see like what do we have, what can we fill the last 724 BV with. There's a lot of players that we have that don't really care that deeply. They don't want to go picking out their mechs just yet. Um, and we end up having to sort of give them options instead. Is that sort of your experience as well?
Yeah, and I think so. Like, there's terms that are defined on the record sheets, brawler, sniper, skirmisher. So sometimes when I have a new player, I say, okay, well, of these role types, which one resonates with you the most? Brawler, sniper, skirmisher? It's very simple. And then I just choose something random from them in there within sort of the BV limits.
Yeah. Yeah, that sort of makes sense. And you're right that sort of, we can squudge things around a bit by, say, adjusting pilot skills. So even if it doesn't quite fit, or if they ask for something a bit bigger, we can help modify it a little bit for them.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's really simple. When I started playing Battletech, I balanced with tonnage originally, and that really does not work, obviously, especially when you compare, clans with inner sphere. It's just no comparison. So tonnage can be fun. Maybe if you're playing a scenario, sort of a campaign rather, balancing via tonnage could work because you are essentially playing heroes against nobodies generally. But in like the random pickup game, where you want things to be close, BV is the simplest and easiest way to go.
Yeah, and on that note, there's so much more to balance than just battle value. And I think that, battle value is a good starting point, and we haven't really had anyone who's tried to like push the limits too hard on what could you actually do with that battle value if if you really tried to break things. So far, generally each side has brought a lance. We haven't had someone bringing, although we did consider for the last game, bringing a swarm of 11 Hollanders to just mob you with gauze rifles. But we resisted the temptation and brought a mere 5 mechs instead. So I do think that battle value is like an okay starting point because we're playing friendly, like I say, pickup games, and no one like is really setting out to break things too badly. I suspect we'd obviously need if we were running like a tournament series or something, we need a bit more than just the battle value, I think.
Yeah, 100%. In all our games, the underlying assumption is we are sort of our objective is to have fun and enjoy the experience and not just focus on winning. Because within a BV limit, you can totally max min and just create a force that's going to win that situation. At least, well, I can speak for myself. I'm always thinking, what's fun narratively to play? What new thing do I want to try out in this game? And with that mentality in a BV limit, our games are generally pretty close. How many games have we played where the conclusion was everybody loses, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that actually leads in a bit as well to the open era. We haven't really had many problems from that because we sort of stick to, for the most part, we all stick to fairly standard technologies, unless someone has a particular gimmick or weird thing they want to bring in and try. So the fact that it's been an open era, I don't think has impacted things too much. People bring old stuff, people bring new stuff, and the only place that I sort of worry for that is the, like, very late era stuff that I don't honestly know that much about. But some of the, stealth armor and, uh, technologies like that that I know sort of or I've read sort of shifted the battlefield quite a bit, but we haven't seen those crop up yet. So what do you like, what's the latest mech you've ever fielded? Like, I don't think I've ever gone later than maybe 3080s.
Yeah, I'm probably around the same.
It was probably we ran you and I ran a team of No, because we talked about doing improved C3, but we dropped it. So yeah, I don't even know. We don't generally run that advanced of technology.
Yeah, and I think when you think of something like improved C3 or C3 in general, it makes the mechs so much more expensive from a battle value perspective. So I still think when you frame things in the concept of battle value within the era open setting, it really helps limit things as well. Because, and with the concept of, I'm not just focused on winning, I'm focused on trying something, I'm focused on having fun. I think that constraint really is enough because, sure, you can really push some of these new technologies and create really sort of stacked teams. The risk of that is really contained within, once again, the BV limit and the attitudes that we bring to the game. One thing I love about Air Open is like, let people play what they want to play. You're on Sarna, you find a mech and you're like, this mech is cool, this mech is neat, it has a neat gimmick. I want to try a lamb. Okay, you want to try a lamb? Good luck. Read the rules.
Now here's something I've always wondered for you though, because you're sort of the lore head. I have never read a BattleTech book in my life, but you have. So, you like scenarios. Don't you find that the lack of setting an era sort of makes it hard to place a particular battle in the universe?
I think this comes all down to storytelling and imagination. A perfect example is clan mechs being piloted by inner sphere pilots. And the big wash of that is to say, well, they're mercenaries that it's clan salvage. That's a good wash of that. Then all of a sudden, you have this lance that is like broken. It's old school. It's from, I don't know, let's say it's before pre-clan invasion. And then it's fighting this, advanced C3 or improved C3 system and stuff like that. And it seems like completely night and day regarding technology. Well, the old lance could be pirates. The new lance could be from one of the major houses. Because the universe is so expansive and so big, you can always fit these things in. The fact that as well that BattleTech really locks in the concept of Star League caches throughout the universe, you can even justify a pirate having this amazing technology because they discovered this Star League cache. I think it's just the universe is so big that everything can fit. And I feel like you can critique. But I think when you critique the situation, you're scoping your own imagination. You just got to open your own imagination. It's storytelling, As GMs, we can just make anything make sense. It really just helps you look at things differently.
Yeah, totally. I've never talked to BattleTech people outside of our particular group, but I do get the impression that that's maybe a bit unusual, or that there's sort of a lot of people who do really like to place these things very specifically in the universe. You like to know exactly which units are engaged with which, using lore appropriate loadouts and stuff. And I think that would be cool, but I don't see that ever cropping up in our particular group. I think we're too casual. We're not hardcore on the battle tech.
Yeah, different degree of hardcore. And I will say from my experience, like the Battletech community, they don't really care how you play Battletech. They just care that you do play Battletech. And I love when people, make a lance that's set in an era that has all the proper decals and like everything is accurate. And you can see the passion. You're like, dude, that's fucking cool. I can totally feel that. And I did that too, right? I did that when I made my Clan Steel Viper lance. But other than that, I'll let my imagination take me across the universe and let it land where it lands. And I'm not going to constrain myself. The rules of Battletech are how I constrain myself. And that's a lot of constraint already, right? That's a lot of rules. So I don't know if we need to go any further than that.
Yeah.
What about our game modes? So we always play game modes. We have a variety that we've invented with inspiration from how Warhammer is set up, some with how campaign operations in BattleTech are set up, some just based on our GMing experience. Why do we use these? What do you think brings to the game, and how does it change the experience for us when we're playing?
Yeah. So when this group sort of first started playing, we sort of did like death matches every time, especially because we were introducing people each time. And so we thought, oh, well, the easiest way to learn to play is to just take your mechs on the field and just slug it out. I find those some of the least interesting games, the sort of straight up fights. Off the tabletop, there's not really any stakes that you're dealing with here. It's just some people who showed up to, I don't know, fight an honor match, and then some people die or whatever. One side wins or one side loses. And I also think there's sort of a bummer to balance because sort of it limits your strategic options a bit into the sort of the heavies and the assaults that can slug it out for a long time. And so we started looking for, what can we do that still action-packed missions, but what can we do to make things a little bit more interesting? Start experimenting with some different game types. We quickly hit the problem where, well, I think this is maybe a point of disagreement between you and me, but I like games with sort of exclusive victory conditions, because we had quite a few matches in a row where we sort of had just ties, like no one accomplishes their objective. Now what? So I've been pushing more for sort of structuring things with attack or defend missions where the destruction of a particular objective decides which team wins. We've got some like capturing missions of various sorts for, go to a particular location, take a thing, scan a thing, do a thing, and then we've mixed and matched those quite a bit. Yeah, I guess sort of which missions stick out to you? Stands out to you about the scenario design? Is that a fair history of how we ended up with our weird chaos missions?
Yeah, I really like the attack, defend, retrieve sort of mission we have, which is the three-way game. Each team has a different objective. I actually like the concept of because we're sort of using these like victory points and hidden objectives for teams and stuff like that. What I like about it is that you come out of the game and it's no longer just a win-lose. It's like a degree of success. And to me, that's more realistic when you consider an actual military operation, right? Because you're going to have loss of life. You're going to have destruction of equipment. There's going to be costs involved. It's never just simply all good or all bad. How we play our games, I like how it comes out where all of a sudden it's like, I won, but man, that was an expensive victory. And, I lost, but I got all my hidden objectives for, my mission, which was great. I think that's cool.
Yeah, so to sort of find a middle ground between me liking, winners and losers, and Nathan preferring sort of, those shades of gray. So we've structured it around victory points. We generally have like a primary objective, attack or defend some little bases or acquire a particular item on the battlefield and escape with it. And so those are the main objectives, and those are worth the bulk of the points, something like 10 points for, completing your main battlefield objective. Then we provide some hidden objectives, which provide a smaller number of points, not enough to actually win the battle on their own, but enough to tip sort of a partial victory either way. And then the last part that we start playing with is basically giving you negative victory points, penalizing you for loss of mechs, which sort of reflects that, like you say, Nathan, the loss of life, the loss of assets, the fact that you don't just want to do this, but you don't want to lose too much while you're completing the objective as well. And I would go even further. I've pitched even offering penalties for like crippled mechs to give some incentive to not simply, our very first matches where they were just death matches with nothing else turned into big mech mosh pits. Whereas here you have to play a little bit more tactically. You maybe don't want to lose a mech. If a mech is sort of marginal and has breaches, you might want to retreat. And we don't even have to use the forced withdrawal rules to accomplish that. It becomes a decision that you make as the commander on the battlefield at that time.
Yeah, I'd actually love for people that listen to this that play with house game modes to send me some ideas to contact us at our email that's linked in the podcast because I'd love more ideas. We should definitely do a future podcast where we actually go over our game modes and our hidden objectives. Because I think they're pretty interesting.
It's a fun sort of meta game trying to come up with reasons for an arbitrary number of mechs to show up on the battlefield and fight each other and then leave at the end of the day.
And I think our nature, us both being quite seasoned GMs, like this is almost natural to us. Like we design things, we have an experience. We're like, oh, how can we make this experience better? How can we make it more narrative? How can we make it more balanced, more push and pull? I feel like I always do this with games. All games, we play them a few times and it's like, what can we change? Like what can we add that will fit well? And the one thing, I know BattleTech has the campaign operations book and it has quite a few scenarios, but the scenarios to me are all the same. They're all the same with a slight little twist. It's like you can have, you can have Coke. No, you can have Pepsi. Oh no, you don't want Pepsi? Yeah, no worries. We have Diet Coke. Oh, you're not a Diet Coke fan? Well, Diet Pepsi. Oh, how about Coke Zero? Like that's what it feels like. Whereas our modes are more like, Coke and Dr. Pepper. Yeah, it's still pretty close, but different. Root beer.
And absinthe. That's what playing your 3-way attack defend retrieval. That thing is like absinthe. My head hurts every day when I wake up after going on a 3-way battle bender.
I know it's a little bit unique to me, but I've said it before that one of my favorite outcomes in games is everybody loses. And I think that comes from my sort of competitive fighting game experience, is just those like draw games are so rare that they're so hype. When that happens in BattleTech, I'm like, yeah, we're all losers. This is the best. Okay, so what about random pilot cards?
Okay, random pilot cards. Hit or miss. They definitely add to the chaos. I assume I think those come with all the minis now, right? They always come with the little box set, so
Yeah.
people probably know what they are, but they're just sort of a couple of pilot cards. They have on them like pilot and gunnery skill, and then a little biography about a particular person, and then a couple of the special abilities. What are those abilities called again? I forget what they are, which book they're from.
They're in campaign operations, but I forget what they're called.
Yeah, campaign ops. Yeah. So they're normally things to make pilots a bit special. We've decided to attach those to every single mech, and then I guess sort of it wasn't necessarily a balancing choice, but the fact that they are random means, or not necessarily random, but we don't know what they all are.
Yeah.
And we don't play the same mechs very often, so you get handed one or two cards that have 2 to 4 options for pilots on them, and we ignore the gunnery and the pilot skills off the cards. We just use those. That's allocated per battle value, but you get to choose which set of pilot abilities you want to use.
Yeah, and I think that this adds personality, in my opinion. That's the primary thing. It adds personality, adds diversity in the battle. And I think about the Battle Cobra, which I play quite often, and the pilot card that I tend to use with that one is the one that allows him to do lateral shifts. And lateral shifts are very rarely useful. But when they're useful, it's cool. So just having little things like that, little options that help you think, look at the battlefield differently, and anything to me that makes the game feel like I'm not just smashing robots into each other. Like BattleTech, the universe emphasizes the robots are friggin' cool and they're awesome. But at the end of the day, it's about the people in the mechs.
Yeah, I sort of get what you're saying. I'm going to say, though, it can end up a bit incoherent if you've got a full lance of them and you're like, all right, a pilot, a Comstar, a House Lao, and some random clanner walk into a bar. They're now part of a lance, all fighting together, and it's a little bit much, don't you think?
Like, I don't actually consider them the people that is written there. I just really consider it the pilot abilities, but I do like to read about the people. Because, like, what is it, the Vapor Eagle, where his special ability is that if his leg gets blown up, he's called Hopper. He doesn't automatically fall, and he can, like, jump around with one leg and still fight. I'm like, this is so obscure. And, like, the story to justify it, it's so fun. But I don't actually think, like, if I have a clanner and I have an inner sphere pilot, well, I rarely mix my lances like that. But if I did, I wouldn't necessarily think these are the actual pilots themselves, because, their timeline wouldn't necessarily fit as well. But it just feeds my imagination. It just adds more personality. And the human mind, at least my mind, is really good at making sense of things, even when they shouldn't make sense. Like finding the pieces that do fit together, like I'm matching two jigsaw puzzles. I'm like, oh, this one could fit here and go from here, and just chucking out the rest and not even worrying about it.
So, good fun. Everyone loves to have more abilities. Some of them are funny. Some of them are quite abusable. Um, I wouldn't say that they've been a big balance problem, but what they have been a problem is complexity.
Yes.
It adds a lot more, and as we've been playing and our battle values have been going up, we often have like full lances on each side now. That's something like 8 cards with maybe 12 different pilot abilities on the field. You worried about that?
One of the advantages of me playing clan more often than not is that I get less mechs. I personally will always choose less over more, just because of the additional complexity it adds to the battlefield, and it might overwhelm my mind a little bit. Like, I think I'm comfortable playing 3 mechs at the same time with pilot abilities and everything like that, and being very comfortable not missing things. But as soon as I go above 3, then it becomes a little bit dicey, and I'm going to miss things. It's not going to, like, because we're playing for fun, it's going to be like after the game, I'm like, I could have done that. But I mean, because the complexity of BattleTech, there's so many rules. We're already saying that anyhow. Now we're just adding another thing to forget, which could have been cool, but I think it adds more value. One thing we forgot to put on this list: design quirks. We play with all the mech's design quirks.
Which range from no impact because they're pickup games, so the fact that a mech is difficult to maintain has no bearing. Some of them, though, can be quite impactful. Some of them are annoyingly complex to remember when they come up. I think probably the most effective one is the stabilized weapon. And I would say the most complex and annoying one is every time I bring one of my Marauder derivatives with narrow, low profile. And now we have to keep track of when it hits a glancing blow. Now it's a glancing blow. When the margin of success is 1, then it's a single glancing blow. And it just becomes a pain in the ass for other people.
I will say, though, an example of something that you don't think is going to impact the game. I mean, it doesn't impact the game mechanically, but it impacts the game narratively, is you playing a blackjack with a bad reputation. Like, there's been games we've been playing and you're like, just my bad reputation blackjack, like kicking people's asses. It adds personality. There's something cool about a blackjack that has a bad reputation coming out on top. It just makes the victory feel more, like, bigger. It makes it feel more important, knowing that you did it with a mech that supposedly sucks or people think sucks.
So I think design quirks are cool. They sort of add a bit of character to the mechs. I feel pretty much the way you do about pilot cards is how I feel about the design quirks. Um, I'm going to this is just a suggestion, something I was going to suggest trying for our group, but might be a little bit easier for people who've been reticent to try out pilot cards because they add a lot. What I was going to suggest is, what if we did 1 pilot card per lance? You nominate a commander or an ace, and they get access to whatever their card is. You could maybe even look through the cards for your lance first, and then pick out 1 card to use, and just make that one pilot a little bit special compared to everyone else. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, funnily enough, on that topic, I was listening to the Mech Bay podcast the other day, and as you know, they know a lot more about BattleTech than we do. And supposedly, that's actually how you're supposed to play it. There's this one guy on the podcast who's a super BattleTech nerd. He knows everything. It's very informative. And he mentioned that when you assign these to lances, you're only supposed to give 1 per lance, and it's supposed to be for your commander to make the commander special.
Great minds think alike.
2 nerds! Who would have thought, coming to the same conclusion? It's amazing.
Yeah, we haven't tried that yet, but I'd like to try that for a couple games, see how it goes.
Yeah, I think that combined with because honestly, the design quirks add enough complexity, plus the advanced rules. You might change your strategy too, right? Like all of a sudden you have this ace. How do you protect the ace? How do you handle the ace differently? It's not a bad idea. Definitely would make it easier.
Well, in the case of Night Star, that was my ace. But unfortunately, out of 3 attacks, you scored 2 head hits, killing him instantly on turn 2 before he had ever fired a weapon.
Well, let's talk about the feels bad rule. That's a perfect segue.
So that's I'd like to say that I didn't get too salty. These things happen, and we still had lots of tonnage on the field. We still managed to drag it to not a you know not a complete rout of our side, but I think that's one of the harder selling point for BattleTech is how swingy it can be. You don't necessarily have a lot of units on the field, maybe 4 or fewer. A lot of your value might be sunk into a particular unit, and 2 rolls of 12 in an attack can end that mech's whole career. Which is, sometimes it happens. You just gotta accept that. I think that there's no way to keep BattleTech if you took that part out. But maybe it doesn't need to feel quite so bad. And we've had some cases where some of the newer players like it's really a struggle to, you know, fight really hard and do your best, and then a couple of bad dice rolls are all that's you between you and being out of the game for the rest of the night. So we tossed around some ideas for how could we mitigate that, make it not feel quite so bad when it happens without ruining the sort of the crunchiness of BattleTech.
Like you say, it happens, and the concept of feels bad really exists in the communities, or in general, you don't want people to have this feeling in games.
Even if it is an accurate reflection of the BattleTech experience.
Lots of the times, the things that people suggest is okay, you headshot someone at the first round of the game. You just say, okay, we'll just ignore that headshot. Let's re-roll it. But personally, I'd prefer much rather to have a rule or a structure in place that actually mitigated this. And your suggestion was, well, let's go to a time of war. So a time of war is the BattleTech role-playing game. And I might be remembering this rule incorrectly because I remember everything incorrectly. But if I am correct, time of war had this element called edge. This was basically what made your pilot special. And for every edge point per game, I believe, you could force a reroll, not only of your rolls, but of your opponent's rolls. So if you went on to the tabletop and you are fighting another mech and they roll a 12 on your head, you say, I'm spending my edge, re-roll that. That was their balance element. And so we were thinking something similar to that because in the scenario that happened in our game, which was sort of a feels bad moment, was, you moved your Night Star up, moved my Timberwolf behind, used my pilot ability of Aid and Pride, super pilot ability to run behind you again before you had a chance to move, took a shot in the rear. I'm expecting to breach, do an engine damage or something like that. Roll 2 attacks, both hit the head. That was, I think, 22 damage to the head. And that's like, wow, that's crazy.
I can't believe that just happened. 95 tons of scrap. Just like that.
Exactly. From a clean mech. There should be a payoff for me getting behind and taking that shot, but it just felt ridiculous. It just felt too lucky and too early in the game. And so the suggestion you were coming up with is we could sacrifice the piloting ability. Like say, okay, this guy's a piloting ability. I'll chuck out the piloting ability and this will force a reroll. So using that like essentially an edge. So every character in the game that came in, every pilot on the stage, their piloting ability card would also have the secondary ability of an edge roll that they could use specifically. Well, we actually didn't talk about this, but I assumed it was specifically for hits landed on them, which sort of makes sense. Because maybe, the mech sees the follow the leader missiles coming towards the head. He's like, oh my god. And he all of a sudden slams the mech low, knocks his head on the front of the console to dodge the missiles, and is concussed, forgets where he is. But still has his basic piloting ability, just forgets how to do his special stuff. Like, to me, I can narratively, it can still make sense to me in my head. I can imagine a situation which has made sense.
Yeah, so we haven't had a chance to try that rule, but yeah, we're tossing around ideas, and that's sort of one of them is we want to make sure that it's not too easy. We don't want to file off the sharp edges on BattleTech. A big part of what makes it interesting is those sharp edges. Sometimes a mech just dies. If your mech might walk too fast in the fog, trip, bonk their head, and knock the pilot unconscious for the rest of the game. So, we don't want to lose that. We don't want it to be too easy or too cheap, but just avoid, give you a cost that you can pay. In this case, losing potentially very powerful pilot abilities and something you can only do once per game just to avoid losing that one mech that you were really excited about and didn't get to see the battlefield at all.
Totally. And so this is another thing that I'd love to hear people's ideas on. So please send us a message or just let us know what you do in these situations if you designed a rule, because I think there's lots of potential here.
Yeah, and we'll report back later about how this rule works because we haven't tried it yet. So we'll see how it goes.
On the topic of house rules, so there's a few house rules that we use. Two biggest ones are we've modified the direct blow rule to make it more simple. So it's just a plus 50% to the weapon damage, or plus 4 on the cluster table if you roll a 12. And then we've also added this concept called lucky glancing. So essentially, let's say someone's in front of you and they've ran a lot, they're in heavy woods, all this crazy stuff has happened, and their to hit modifier makes it so basically you have to roll 15 to hit them. So it's an automatic miss. What we say is as long as you've line of sight and you're within range, a 12 can always be a glancing blow. So you can always technically hit them with like a PPC that does 50% damage or whatever, reduced by 50%.
Yeah, I don't think that one's come up very often. Most people, by the time they get up to plus 12, they start thinking real hard about the ammo consumption or heat generation before they want to make that roll. But we have had people roll those a few times.
Yeah.
I think that the much more impactful one is the direct blow, sort of turning it from the tactical operations direct blow rule based on margins of success and turning into more like a D&D critical hit, where if you roll double sixes, you get extra damage. Um, that increases lethality a bit, but I don't think that it impacts things too badly because we already play with the regular tactical operations glancing blow rule, where matching a target number gives you half damage. So all in all, I think we still have our damage tuned down a little bit from default.
Yeah. And even when you look at the margin of success calculation, a while ago I did a comparison and I found that 50%, it's safe. That's on the high end of average, but still it's a simple calculation to do and you feel good about it, so why not? It's not that much bigger than what it would normally be. And as a matter of fact, it can be higher than 50% with the margin of success rule, dependent on what your to-hit modifier is. So yeah, I think those rules are mainly about partially simplification, partially just fun. Another house rule that we have that this is more of a player dynamic rule is the incorporation of bringing in new technologies. So if we're bringing in new non-standard technologies, it's our practice where we're supposed to communicate to the players after the mechs have been selected. So for example, I brought artillery into a game. Artillery hadn't been used a game before, and it really surprised the people on the board because they didn't know how to deal with it. They just couldn't adapt their strategy. So if after I chose the mechs and after they chose their mechs, I said, hey, just so you know, I'm bringing artillery weaponry, that would have given them a chance to read up.
Yeah, yeah, and that's partly because again, we're playing with a lot of people who don't have a strong background in this, and also people who don't necessarily want to trawl through rule books. I'm happy to if a new tech shows up on the battlefield, I'll break out the book and start reading about how it works. But not everyone wants to do that. People just want to show up and run their mechs. So to make things feel a little bit more fair for people showing up the table, they haven't plowed through all 500 pages or whatever of tac ops.
So we already touched on it, but we incorporated advanced rules that we like. So why do we use these? What do they bring to the game? How does it change the experience for us?
I don't think I can even answer this because I don't think that we have a formal list. As we were talking about this, I realized we should probably write down exactly which advanced rules we use and don't use, because so far we have ones that we use all the time, like critical hits. We have ones that are sort of just like a grab bag of if someone wants to, like the alternate movement modes, crawling and climbing and all sorts of things. When someone realizes that, when the moon fog rolls in and everyone's taking movement penalties, then we break out the hurried movement, sprinting when someone needs to go a little bit further. We sort of pick and choose the tac ops rules as we need them. We should probably formalize that a bit more. What do you think?
That is true. But I also think that rather than say, like, we play with basic rules unless we don't, it's better to say we play with advanced rules unless we don't. Because the two examples of advanced rules we know we don't use is we don't use the charging advanced rule and we don't use advanced line of sight. And we don't use either of those just because they're a pain to calculate. Yeah, sure, you might have a better outcome, but we think about time on the table and does it really add enough value to justify the time? Whereas I think stuff like hurried movement or stuff like propped shot, or that's the wrong term, but when you lean against something, these rules are pretty simple and easy to apply and are relatively intuitive. But like when you have to pull out bed mass to calculate a 2-hit roll, this is just going a little bit too far for me.
I'm not sure that I agree. I think that we would need to run through. We need like a great big checklist of which advanced rules are we using or not. Because I suspect there are more rules than you remember in TAC Ops that we aren't using just because we're not using them. You didn't remember them and no one else went looking.
I think I can admit that the not remembering is very possible, but I would be surprised. I'm a bit of a nerd, right? Like I look at the advanced rules, I know the advanced rules are there, and I apply them when I apply them. But most of this stuff is really niche. I just have to get in a situation in which I actually have to use them. And sometimes these rules, like they're so niche that when does that situation arise? I think, I've known about I'm calling it propped shot, which is not what it's called. But I've known about that forever. But I've only had a chance to ever use it once because it's so terrain specific, right? And I'm saying I'm 90% confident that the only time we don't use an advanced rule is when we consciously haven't been interested in it.
All right, what's the bet?
Put money on the line, eh?
Oh, it doesn't have to be money. We can bet whatever.
I'll bet you $5,000. No, I'm just kidding.
How about 500 battle value in our next game?
Oh, that's cheeky. Okay, I'll bet 500 battle value for the next game, but we need to set the criteria of the bet a little bit better.
All right. Ground rules. You specify them.
This is complicated. I need to write a contract, man. I'm not in contract writing mode right now.
Where's the advanced rules for BattleTech betting? Probably in strategic operations somewhere.
Somewhere in strategic operations.
We'll figure it out.
Okay, we'll talk about it after. We'll figure it out after. But we'll do a bet.
And next recording, we're gonna tell you how it turned out. And I will be right.
And when Nathan is right, I want the world to remember this moment because it rarely happens. Okay, so random map.
I don't know. Nathan shows up with a bag of new maps he's bought, and then we randomly roll for one. I don't think we usually even get to see them beforehand. In some cases, we've sent pictures around so that everyone can see what the options are. I don't think anyone cares other than you and me. Again, they're just here to pilot the mechs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It adds a little bit more dynamicism if you don't know exactly what the battlefield will look like. And then after we roll the maps, sometimes we let people put down a number of little overlay tiles on top of them to modify terrain. Bounds produce some dodgy matches now and then, but I like the idea of it.
Yeah, I really like the concept of randomized maps, and I think because I'm the one that owns the majority of the stuff, like I own the maps, I tend to try to put rules in to keep me honest. Because, if I know what map it is, and I know what mech I'm playing, and I know this before other players, my brain just starts spinning. You can't help it. Your brain starts thinking about the scenario, the ideal thing to do, the strategy you want to play. and I would make a specific strategy for that specific situation. And so in order to counteract that impulse of myself, I find the random maps very helpful because then I really choose something based on, okay, what could be fun? And, I might get screwed by the map. Oh well, but at least this will be fun and something new to try.
I don't think we have very seldomly played on the same map twice. You have a map buying problem.
I have a BattleTech buying problem.
But yeah, it means that you can't really formulate specific strategies. Then you layer on top of that the fact that we sort of roll randomly for which map edges players are starting on, which sections of maps will have different objectives. We sort of break everything down by map quadrants. And so pretty much everything gets rolled randomly at the outset. And that's actually on the day of when we're playing. So there's no time to formulate specific attack routes and stuff. You have to make it snap judgments on the day of. So I think it works pretty well. It does make things. I think it makes things more dynamic, and it avoids sort of people coming in with too much of a picture of how they want to run a particular game.
Totally. Okay. Well, it's now been over 50 minutes of recording. And we're finally at the biggest thing that I think the craziest thing that changes what our average game looks like. Save the best for last. That is the recently released BattleTech Initiative deck. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, that thing is pure chaos. I am on the fence on how much I like it, but it certainly does induce a lot of chaos. For anyone who hasn't used it, it's a deck of cards, sort of shaped after a standard 52 card deck, but the suits are based on the great houses, and the face cards are mech warrior, lord, duke. So it's a mech themed deck of cards that you pick out a subset of a handful of suits that you play with for a particular game, and then each side, instead of rolling an initiative roll, each side draws an initiative card. You go in order based on the drawn card. I guess where the chaos kicks in is each of the cards has an ability tied to it, which range from small tweaks to the battle that I sort of like to extremely powerful cards that can cause very abrupt, sometimes very weird turnarounds in the state of the battle. So this is definitely of all the things that we've talked about, this is probably like the weirdest. I've seen lots of people recommend using cards for initiative before, but this initiative deck is on a whole different level. One correctly drawn card can really swing the battle if it shows up at the right time. Which is, I assume, why you like it, Nathan.
Exactly. I love it so much. Like, it can be such bullshit, guys. If you've played with the initiative deck, you know what I'm talking about. You can get the craziest draws. But one of the problems, I think, with BattleTech, or not problems, but one of the things that I think makes it feel a little bit old and is a little bit of the shortcoming of the game is how the game actually handles initiative generally. And I love the initiative deck for many reasons. Like, I love it for the chaos. I love it how all of a sudden you can hold your initiative number if you don't use your card ability. But mainly it's the contrast that it provides to the traditional swinginess. Like, the initiative deck causes swingy situations, 100%. But they're interesting swingy situations. Whereas the traditional way to do initiative in BattleTech is just as swingy. You lose initiative, retreat. You win initiative, go on the offensive. It's just as swingy, but it's boring.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to say that traditional initiative is it's certainly not perfect. But I find the deck oftentimes too much, and sometimes sort of strains disbelief exactly what it's supposed to represent. For me, it really feels gamey on top of the game and takes away from the verisimilitude of BattleTech, the hardcore realism you come to BattleTech for. But no, it it feels like it's out of a different game to me. You're definitely right that it feels much more modern than a lot of other parts of BattleTech. I don't know if I like it though.
Even in the rules of the initiative deck, it suggests that you only use it for stuff that's like campaign based or stuff where you aren't really seeking balance. And I definitely think there are certain cards in there that are just completely broken. What's so interesting about it is that how broken or not the card is really depends on the specific situation that you're in. For example, that card that I used last game when we had fog and I was the Timberwolf, when I was Aiden Pride, right? And it forced you guys to run away. With the fog, it just set you guys behind for the rest of the game when my objective was to get away from you, right? It basically gave me a full turn advantage on you. The game when you use the same ability on me, and it forced me to run away in a straight line and give you my back, which allowed a critical hit, which took out my only weapon that didn't generate heat on my mech. So the rest of the game, I was completely crippled. We could probably list at least 10 cards in the deck that are pretty broken, especially when you consider how it impacts a clanner in comparison to how it impacts an inner sphere. Each mech in your lance generates 5 more heat for as long as you hold that card. Okay, that's brutal for an inner sphere mech. For a clan mech, generally it's like, whatever. So this is a new thing that they were attempting. Once again, they weren't focusing on balance clearly, and there are balance issues. But when I've talked to some people about this, like some of the old school BattleTech players I play with, it really resonated with them because they said a similar thing to me, which is they hated the go forward, go back of initiative. I lose initiative, I retreat defensive. I win initiative, I go on the offense. This deck provides a unique situation where you can lose initiative, but your card is good enough that you might want to press the offense anyhow for the potential gain you could get of landing a hit. There's something that's like, I think, initiative 7, and it's double damage on a single hit. You have a Gauss rifle? Wow. You're going to take that risk, right? And I think forcing situations like that really makes the game much more dynamic, less like chess, more narratively interesting. But yeah, for sure not balanced at all. You couldn't take this deck into a tournament. It would be everyone would be pissed off. Everyone would be so angry, right?
And I would say my concerns aren't so much about balance. I said before that I don't think that BattleTech is a very balanced game. I don't think it tries to be, but it certainly cranks up the chaos factor, adding in the initiative deck. I think it's pretty fun for the casual pickup games, and aside from a few sort of feels bad moments with them, on the whole, it's mostly okay. It's just another way to generate it, and occasionally it moon fog rolls in and everything gets very annoying for a while on the battlefield. But overall, they're fine. They're fun. I don't know how much you paid for them, but you know, I assume a little pack of cards is pretty cheap and might spice up a couple matches.
And to the reference of Moonfog that Michael's speaking about, this is a perfect example of a rule mistake we made where we were on the moon, we were fighting in a vacuum, and we pulled the environmental card for fog. When you're in a vacuum, you actually move faster already, so it sort of was counteracting each other. It was this really weird, convoluted situation just because we thought there could be fog on the moon. And now whenever we draw this card, even like on a planetary setting, we're like, the moon fog, it's back!
Yeah. But honestly, the problem with the card wasn't the goofiness of the moon fog. The problem was that it completely uh, sandbagged our attack on an attack versus defense mission. Like we drew this card at the beginning. It adds +1 movement points to all movement, and that we were on a pretty tight turn limit to actually get in and do our objective, and it crippled the whole game. It was still fun though, because we had a good time trying to fight around it and deal with the fact that the literal battlefield was working against us. So it's fun if you've got a bunch of people who are good sports. Otherwise, you might need to pick out some of the cards that are a little bit dodgy. Some of the cards that can cause really dramatic swings in the structure of the game.
And we were also super unlucky because there's technically ways to clear out that moon fog, but there were 2 cards that could clear it out, and I believe they were in the last 3 cards of the deck. So we played all the way through, like hoping, okay, we're going to be able to switch this somehow. There's a chance it's getting better, but screwed completely to the end. Yeah, man, damn that moon fog. Fog on the moon, damn you.
Yeah, I'm gonna curse moon fog till the end of my days.
Yeah, there's no such thing as fog for me now. It's literally if I'm driving in Calgary and it's foggy out, it's friggin' moon fog, man. There's no such thing as fog anymore. It's all damn moon fog.
That's a great moment we would not have had. We would never have tried a foggy battle on the moon if it weren't for that initiative deck. So the initiative deck was worth it for me just for that one match. That one protracted, drawn out, painful match.
Yes, we suffered together, and it was glorious.
Yeah, so I guess that sort of is overall how we run our games right now. Delivered chaotically, much like our games. We're still developing that, but that's where we're at right now. That's our thoughts so far. We're excited to hear any ideas other people have, because we're trying to figure out what works well for us and for our group.
Yeah, and as you can tell, we chuck a lot in there, so you can't blame us when we make rule mistakes, right? Right?
Well, we can blame Nathan because he's the one who brings most of these rules.
And with that, on to the next segment.
Tertiary objective, Battlefield Outcome Report segment. Initiating.
This is the Interstellar News Network, boots on the ground, hot on the tails of a recent skirmish fought over an alleged Star League supply cache. The skirmish, fought behind us mere days ago, saw mercenaries and clanners alike descend on this territory with the ferocity of a pack of piranhas scavenging a corpse. There, in the distance, enshrouded in tree cover, a Zeus peppered with small laser fires stands still, propped up by the trees around it with its own barrel fist jammed into its cockpit. Its pilot, tragically, having taken their last breath within. Only those unknown to us who survived this chaotic encounter could testify to the happenings of the battle that led to this scene of self-inflicted harm. To those of us with only the aftermath behind us, we are left with feelings of confusion, dread, and sorrow. Reporting live, Nathaniel Smith with Iron End boots on the ground. Always first on the scene.
So, what happened and how did it happen? Well, a Zeus, when trying to fend off an elemental swarm attack, punched himself in the head, killing himself. Elementals, if you aren't familiar, although you probably are clan battle armor. They operate in units of 5 called a point, and they function quite differently from battle mechs. Think of them as super infantry. Honestly, they are extremely badass. Anywho, they have a few specific anti-mech attacks, but perhaps one of the most menacing is a swarm attack. The swarm attack allows elementals that are on the same space as a mech to attempt to mount the mech. And the payoff: once the elementals are on the mech, the weapon attacks of the elementals are guaranteed hits. No rolls required. Well, there are a few ways to get an elemental off of a mech, but the most common is to get them off with a punch attack. The Zeus in the story above attempted to do this, did 2 rolls which unfortunately both missed. And very unfortunately, when one of these misses when defending a swarm attack, it results in you unintentionally punching yourself. The Zeus in question had to roll 2 damage locations on the punch location table, one of which landed on the head. This resulted in the Zeus smashing itself in the head with a whopping 8 damage. Unfortunately for the pilot, the Zeus had already taken a medium laser to the head earlier in the round, so the 8 damage was just enough to finish him off. Let's consider this sweet, sweet revenge for all those in the world smaller than their sibling that have had the first-hand experience of the dreaded "stop punching yourself" exchange.
Secondary objective, Rule Check Discovery segment. Initiating.
Alright everybody, I knew this was going to happen. It's called BungleTech for a reason. I had to get this rule correction out of the way because it's actually from the first episode, specifically from our Battlefield report. If you remember in our last episode, the battlefield report was talking about a summoner that had a through armor crit that killed the pilot, functionally. Anyhow, this came about because of our use of the sharpshooter pilot ability, but it turns out, I may have misinterpreted it a little bit. But in my defense to the players that are listening to this that I murdered, know that it's pretty complicated, okay? So let's go over it really quick. The sharpshooter pilot ability reads as following. If remaining stationary and not making physical attacks may fire one weapon only in an aimed shot. Successful attack grants extra potential critical hit even if armor remains in the location. An aimed shot is something you can do on a mech when it's shut down, or if you have a targeting computer. And basically how it works is it increases the chance of hitting a certain location. You say, I want to hit the leg. Okay. You do the attack roll, 7, 8, and 9, I believe, become the leg. If it doesn't hit that, it hits the other location where it hits. So technically, it would really jack up your chances of hitting certain areas. I misinterpreted this a little bit. And before I go into this and we talk about really how this impacts the game, or some conversations I had with members in the community to really understand this rule, let me just say a line that is technically true and has come through my understanding of how Arrow IV is classified as a weapon. An Arrow IV is an artillery area effect non-missile weapon missile launcher. I repeat, an Arrow IV is an artillery area effect non-missile weapon missile launcher. Is that confusing, Michael?
Where did you pull that from? What book is that on? Do you have it handy?
That is putting all the classifications of an Arrow IV together into a single sentence. So there's no book that says that directly.
Oh, I see.
So none of the books directly state this. But that's basically an Arrow IV. It's an artillery weapon. It does area effect damage, but it's a non-missile weapon, but it is a missile launcher.
Okay, all right.
And so this is where the confusion comes from. Because essentially, the sharpshooter ability, because it's using an aim shot, okay, it can't be used with missile launcher weapons, can't be used with LBX, can't be used with hyper Gauss rifles, can't be used with rapid fire weapons. I think those are the limitations. The reason we played with this rule as it was, is because when I was looking at the Arrow IV, I was looking at it by its damage type, which is area effect, and its weapon type, which is artillery, technically an artillery weapon. If you look at the TAC Ops book in which it's stored in, it's referenced in the artillery section. Damage type, clearly area effect. Actually, there's an exception to that, but nothing that violates the principles of what can't use an aim shot. So I took this question to the community to see what people's consensus was. And in general, people felt that this pilot ability with a homing missile didn't really make sense, but with direct fire missile could be feasible. Here's a different rationale. A very experienced player said that, well, sharpshooter shouldn't function as it's a pilot skill, and pilot skills shouldn't be able to exist in the artillery phase. Another person said, the Arrow 4 homing missile is technically autonomous after launch. Therefore, the pilot doesn't control it, and a pilot ability wouldn't make sense, as it is more about the tracking system of the missile rather than the pilot's own control of it. Another one, anything indirect shouldn't be able to be aimed, as it assumes that the pilot doesn't have a line of sight on the target, which would make the concept of sharpshooter too fantastical. However, direct fire is more feasible. Because I was getting lots of information, and I should note that of all the responses I got from the community, very experienced players, we really couldn't lock down if this was a true yes or no. It was a call. To get some more clarity, I ended up talking to a Catalyst rep, and this was the conclusion. The Catalyst rep said that the term technically used under the aimed shot rule is missile launcher, and mentioned that this is different from missile weapon damage type. So essentially, that's why an Arrow IV is a missile launcher, but not a missile weapon. And here's where the confusion comes from. Because missile weapon is something that's actually defined in the book. So is area effect. These are damage types that are defined in the book. Missile launcher is a term that's not defined in the books. There are some key term sections in BattleTech, but they're pretty small. That being said, missile launcher is not a term. So in my interpretation, just because something has missile launcher written in its description, to me that's just flavor text. It's like saying it shoots red lasers. I wouldn't necessarily think that red was some sort of criteria or qualification. And to me, this sort of realized a little weakness of BattleTech, and that's the fact that they don't define key terms like this well. What do you think, Michael?
Can I try to turn your world upside down?
Go ahead.
So I find the answer from the Catalyst rep the most interesting here. So your original explanation of aimed shot not working with missile weapons, what book did that come from?
That's found under Total Warfare. It's under the section on aimed shots. It's also redirected to that section from Targeting Computer. I think it's page 102 or 103, something like that.
So I think I'm looking at the battle mech manual here, and I think that it's a lot more clear, and it's also very different what they've written in the battle mech manual. I don't know how many years later. So in the battle mech manual, they have a section on specialized attacks. Page 30 has aimed shot on it, where I assume it's the same aimed shot. It's always possible that I'm reading something different here, but here they say that the following weapon types cannot make an aimed shot: area effect, cluster, or flak, all capitalized, because those are keywords for damage types. So that seems like something that's maybe been changed since the Total Warfare that you have, is they don't talk about the type of weapon, but rather the damage types that can't do it.
Well, on that note, a slight clarification. Technically, in the aim shot sections of Total Warfare, it does say that, but it says it in another section that specifically seems to be talking about aim shot pertaining to shut down units. It's interesting. It's really interesting because I definitely think there's lack of clarity in the rules. Because if it's referencing, if the manual is pointing back to Total Warfare in that section, you'll see there's two sections. It starts out, it says aim shots, and it talks about on shutdown mechs, references those, but then has a second section, like a subsection of a type of aimed shot, which is sort of interesting to me.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the rules that this one definitely has been cleaned up a lot better in the Battle Mech manual. I think it's a lot more clear what it's supposed to work with and what it's supposed to not work with. So I'm sort of surprised that the Catalyst Games rep even mentioned anything about missile launchers, because the current rules in Battle Mech manual don't mention anything about weapons it doesn't work with. They just mention the damage types.
Sorry, what are the 3 damage types that doesn't work?
Area effect, cluster, or flak.
And here's what's interesting about that then. Because technically, by that definition, the homing missile of Arrow IV would be able to do an aim shot, because when it hits, it counts as direct fire ballistic for damage type.
But then there's a second thing which says that indirect fire cannot be used,
Oh,
cannot be aimed shot.
okay. Well, that clears it up. That's the clearest thing we could have said. Anyhow, that's a big rule mistake. And what does this change about the game? Well, specifically, this was a mistake that was only made in one scenario. But this resulted in 2 critical hits that were crippling to the opponents. One was the through crit head cockpit, which basically knocked the guy out and killed him. That was a really devastating blow. The other one was it hit a foot actuator or something like that, so the mech could no longer move as much. Those were 2 criticals that, from the opposing forces, I mean, definitely with the summoner was just wiped out of the game. And the Crockett that took the foot blow, that was a pretty negative impact, really impacted their ability to come in.
So what would you have would you have done differently? Do you think you made the right call on the table there? I wasn't there, so walk me through the dramatize what happened when this happened, and I presume the other person told you that can't possibly be how it works.
So I think that when this rule was challenged at the table, it was challenged in a way that didn't make sense or was wrong. Essentially, they didn't say it won't work for a missile weapon. It was challenged based on the fact that artillery shouldn't be played in standard games. It was a really interesting defense they're trying to make, and I think that if they had pointed this out or taken the tech manual and say, well, it's indirect fire and blah, 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 then it would have changed some things. I still feel some lack of clarity in the rules, or contradictions at least, with Total Warfare, right?
Yeah, definitely. And so, when I see a rules discrepancy, my instinct is to reach for the book and go thumbing through and try to find there, and then we would try to lawyer it here. But I guess in this case, it wasn't really anyone trying to lawyer the rules. It was just someone that felt, it was a feels bad moment. Could have been mitigated by our new feels bad mechanic ideas. But, it was just someone who at the moment felt it didn't feel right. It bummed them out and they didn't like that this happened. So then you went out of your way to try and get clarity on the rule,
Exactly.
even though you benefited from it.
To be honest, sharpshooter paired with a catapult with arrow 4, when it functions on indirect fire on homing missiles and direct fire, that turns out is pretty powerful. And I only landed 2 crits through that ability, 2 additional crits that were like beyond what would have been normal. But the fact that I was rolling crits on the crit table made people so nervous and so terrified, I think made the opposing force rush more than they should have, which just really, really made them get splattered more. It was pretty much a one-sided battle, to be honest. My catapult ended the battle pristine. I had a mauler, no breaches, entire opposing force wiped out. It was really a bad time. It's really a bad time for my opponents.
So you're saying you felt guilty afterwards and you had to go and seek the truth as some sort of atonement.
I didn't feel guilty. And the reason I don't feel guilty is because BattleTech's confusing. We make mistakes. We have to accept that we make mistakes. But I'm willing to right wrongs. And I'm willing to look back and see, what was actually the thing. And it's too bad we didn't have you there with the BattleTech manual.
Listen, looking back, there's no way to right the wrong of that poor summoner's pilot getting splattered all over the sky. You can't put him back together anymore.
Well, as we know, meat is cheap. At least the mech was still in good condition. He'll pass it down to his family. Not that that's how the clans do it, but we'll just pretend it happens that way. Man, it's something that we communicated in the first episode, and this is going to keep happening, guys. That's why we're calling this BungleTech, so strap on in and get ready for the ride of your confused lives.
Yeah, and if they keep rewriting rules in different ways, then we'll have material for us to argue about for decades.
And the funny thing about that statement is people have already been arguing about BattleTech rules for decades, because the game, I think, was released in like 84 or something like that. That being said, BattleTech manual is amazing. It's the clearest of all the books, so that's a huge step forward in their direction. Would still like more key terms to be defined in there, but what can you do? No more through armor crits on Aero IV artillery. Too bad.
You're a monster.
Tertiary objective. Stories of the Inner Sphere segment. Initiating.
B-Vale, Unka, Free Worlds League, 18th of May, 3061. Will took a second to stare at his ring finger as he pulled on a rubber glove. It had been 9 years since Anna's death on Tukiyid, but he still wore her ring beside his own. He sighed, pulling the glove on with a snap, and picked up the paint roller. It was a quarterly ritual, getting out the tins of purple paint and going over his mech. Everyone on the team was doing the same. Will shared a hangar with Kentavious Kane, Kent for short. He turned up a year earlier with a mech that was literally falling to pieces. Definitely not short on bravado, that guy. Thinks he's on Solaris 7. His in-your-face Wolverine suits his in-your-face personality. Will looked over at him chatting up one of the newer techs, shades on indoors, a cigar hanging from the corner of his mouth. He isn't gonna do it again this time. He can do his own work. Hey, Kentavious! Over here! He shouted from the other side of the hangar. You're not gonna convince the poor girl to paint your damn mech for you. Kent feigned shock, lifting the shades from his eyes. Me? I'd never think of such a thing. I always pay attention to a beauty like this. And the mech too, he said with a wink. Will rolled his eyes. Kent's laugh echoed in the tall hangar, and the tech blushed so hard her face turned beetroot. Will turned back to his work. Damn him. If he isn't battle ready, I will be. He got to work. It would take all day, but it was necessary. The seemingly never-ending downpour on Unka would eventually strip the paint every few months, sometimes wearing at the more delicate parts of exposed systems. Painting the legs was the most important, as was checking the water seals. Unka was nearly all water, but a lot of the sea between and around the islands was shallow, and Will had convinced Commander Azat that, where possible, retrofitting all the mechs so their heat sinks were in the legs would make sense for defending this world. Azat had agreed with Will and let him take charge of the work. That was years ago. Now, fording the shallow seas was standard practice for their team, although they trained less frequently than Will would have liked. Definitely much less than he did in Comstar. In Azat's own words, "Who would want to attack us? They lose more armor plating fighting us than they could take away." Still, best be prepared, just in case. Will had just finished a leg section and went to move his scaffold. He glanced over to the other bay and saw Kent was still chatting up the young woman. "Kent!" he shouted over. "This isn't a holiday camp, it's a military base. Get some work done." Kent picked up a glove, winked at Will, and finished smoking his cigar as the tech walked away. B-Vale, Unka, Free Worlds League, 21st of May, 3061. Kent couldn't sit still. Commander Azat was frowning, and everyone else was looking at Will, who felt uneasy in his purple militia jacket. "You've fought clanners before, haven't you?" asked Aditutu Nijoku, the static defense unit spider pilot. "We should be okay." Will didn't know what to say. The sum of his combat experience had been watching his wife die while fighting the Diamond Sharks. He didn't want to say that this bunch of nobodies who just happened to own mechs would be no match for the clans. He felt nauseous and gripped the chair in front of him tightly. All he wanted to do was go and hide. "Commander, play the recording again, please," he asked Azat. Azat clicked a few buttons, and the blurry tattooed face of a fat man came to life.
"I am Star Leader Chris Moon of the Clan Jade Falcon. We have come to take your world. Surrender now or face our challenges. We bid you 5 stars.
Then the recording cut off. "There is one drop ship incoming. ETA 3 days, Aditutu said. "How much can they accomplish?" "Clan mechs are supposed to be way better than ours. Isn't that right, Will?" said Rook Davies, who was a rookie pilot with a Panther. Her mech was on its first coat of purple paint. "They are," replied Will. "But something about that message just doesn't seem right. How could clanners get so far into free world space without us hearing about it first? And the name Moon? Does that mean anything to any of you?" Kent slammed a fist on the table in front of him, ignoring Will's questions.
It's just one dropship. We have 6 mechs. We can beat their asses back into space. Even if they do challenge me personally, I am ready for it. Just trust me on this."
Nobody replied to Kent. Zhang Ming, the Locust pilot, was crying. After an awkward minute of everyone looking at the floor, Commander Azat coughed into his hand. "In any case, the capital is not sending reinforcements. They say if we lose at B-Vale, they have to keep their assets to defend Shenville. So, we've 6 battle mechs. We will be the front-line defense. The infantry and artillery will stay put in B-Vale to protect the civilians in case we fail."
"More like they'll be protecting the Care McInnes factory,"
quipped Kent. Azat glared at Kent. "This is a military unit, and we follow orders. Dismissed." Will didn't wait for anyone else. He left the briefing room and headed straight for his bunk. He couldn't believe he had traveled so far to get away from the clans, and they'd still found him. He just couldn't get the idea out of his head that there was something wrong about the blood name of the warrior giving the challenge. He tried his hardest to forget the clans even existed, but now he was struggling to remember his thorough Comstar training. He heard footsteps behind him as he reached his door. It was Aditutu. "Hey, look," he sighed. "I fought clanners once, and only once. I came here so I didn't have to do it again. I really need to lie down, so can you save your questions for later? We've 3 days for this." As he opened his door, Aditutu pushed him through and shut the door behind him. Will was shocked by how strong she was for being a head shorter than him. Look, Broadoak, let's get something straight here. Out of the 6 of us, you're the only one with real combat experience. We need you, we really do. But that's not why I'm here. Adatutu pushed Will onto his bunk gently and sat next to him. She held his left hand and softly touched both the wedding rings. Will felt a rush of sadness. His throat dried up. You never told any of us what happened on Tukayid. We know the general story. We don't know anything about this. She held up his hand. But you need to open up. She pulled him in close. Her body heat felt good against him. It was a different type of heat than a battle mech that had been pushed too hard. Something he hadn't felt since he'd left Tukayid. And he did open up. He couldn't get his words out at first, but eventually he spoke and told Adatutu his life story. And she told him her life story. And by the next morning, it was like a weight had been lifted. Village of Tenelid, Umka, Free Worlds League, 25th of May, 3061. They were a day late. Tenelid was in tatters. The small fishing village was burning. Dead bodies littered the streets. Men, women, and children. Why would Jade Falcons come here and do this? This is very wrong, Will said over their unit's radio. The clanners I knew fought challenges and had honor. They didn't run around murdering civilians. Kent had taken point in his Wolverine with its rush paint job and led the way up the main thoroughfare. They must have soaked the place in flammable fuels, or else the rain would have put the fire out by now. Agreed, replied Zhang, flanking Kent and her Locust. Does anyone see life signs? I've got some on thermal, said Adatutu. In storage tank G. I'll go take a look. Wait, interrupted Commander Azat. It's my responsibility. I'll go. Will, you're with me. They had parked their mechs outside the metal storage tank. The dome was essentially a giant chiller and full of fish, and a family had managed to hide out in there. Will waited at the doorway, keeping an eye on their mechs more than anything else, while Azat spoke to the elder of the family. They were reluctant at first, but eventually the grandfather and Azat had a short conversation. Well, prompted Will when Azat was back outside. Battle mechs, painted in tiger stripe, orange with green, 10 of them, and a host of warriors in wheeled vehicles. They came from the North Road Bridge and headed back that way after destroying the place. They didn't have any demands, just started torching the village. The elder said it was like they were trying to find something and got angry when they couldn't. They left less than an hour ago. If they came for something, it clearly wasn't fish. What else is there? Nothing, Azat shrugged. And they seem to be heading away from the factory islands. But I know one thing. If they have wheeled vehicles, they're stuck on the road. We can outmaneuver them. Let's take a shortcut. The island chains around Beevale were home to a multitude of fishing villages connected by a single bridged highway. Most of the populace used boats, but road vehicles were still in use. The militia had their walkers, as some of the locals like to call them. The Umkan seas near the islands were always calm this time of year. Will once thought it had something to do with the rain, but Azat had taught him to read the weather better over the years. They weren't deep either. As long as they kept to within 3 kilometers from the coastlines, they could ford the barrier reefs and never enter water deeper than 2 or 3 meters. Thankfully, it wasn't typhoon season. It was a good plan. Azat had no combat experience, but Will respected his cool head and local knowledge. He was a good leader. Adatutu's spider was in the lead, its nimble legs plotting a course through the sea, making sure nothing dangerous was underfoot. Will stayed at the back, protecting the rear of the commander's awesome. They would need his assault mech in the coming battle if they were to have any chance against the clanners, especially if they were outnumbered. The radio buzzed. It was Adatutu. Contact ahead, 2 clicks northeast. The enemy is still on the bridge. That's good, said Azat. We can stop them before they reach the next village. Remember, we are here to save lives. And kill those bastards! Kent shouted as he maneuvered onto his small atoll, bringing his mech fully out of the water. They're mine! His Wolverine's thruster jets thundered and the medium mech blasted off over the sea, water evaporating into the steam around him. He thinks he's a Solaris gladiator. Doesn't he know this is real? Life or death? Will could feel the weight of Anna's ring pressing on his finger. Kent, what are you doing? get back into formation. Azat's tone was flat, but hard. Will could hear the anger trying to creep out, but the man kept it in check. When Kent didn't reply, he gave new orders. Attitude 2, follow Kent. You can keep up. Everyone else, form up on me. Will watched Attitude 2 expertly bounce away. She had exceptional control of her machine, but he knew the light armor of a spider was just a practice target for a clan mech. Azat pushed his awesome forward. Will's Shadowhawk was behind and to the left. Zhangmin's Locust and Rook Davies' Panther flanked the commander's mech on either side. They were a pretty light lance, and being in the sea hampered their only asset, their speed. Still, they had cut off a good amount of distance with a shortcut. Weapons fire flashed on Will's sensors, too far away to see or hear. Kent had gotten into range. His Wolverine was efficient in combat, but Kent was a hot-headed pilot. Will's restraints felt very tight all of a sudden, like he was trapped. With every step closer, he could hear the actual sounds of battle. Visibility through the rain was difficult, but he could catch the odd flash of laser fire. Kent's voice came through, full of static. "They're getting away. The clan mechs, I mean. We've got the vehicles trapped." Closing to 500 meters, Will was gaining some visibility through the downpour. Kent had managed to destroy a section of the bridge, cutting off the road to the north, and had jumped his mech onto the bridge behind the enemy, cutting them off to the south. He was pummeling the vehicles with lasers. It was like blasting fish in a barrel. Attitude was following the enemy mechs at a distance. One was left behind in the sea, struggling to keep steady. It looked like an enforcer, but with only one arm. Azat stopped 300 meters from it, aimed and fired with all 3 of his particle projectile cannons. The clan mech was blown to bits by the PPC discharge before Will could get a proper reading on it. But something about it looked wrong. More like a junker than a clanner. Attitude 2, keep your distance, don't take any risks, the commander ordered. Kent, you have them. Cease firing, please. It was a full minute before Kent stopped. The vehicles were burning husks. "Okay, Kent, you had enough killing now?" said Rook with venom in her voice. "Ha! Have I had enough? They murdered people, Rook. What do you think? We should just let those bastards go? We all have families on this rock. Well, except Will, but he knows all about revenge. Don't you, buddy?" Will walked his mech up to the bridge. He didn't know what to answer. The road was strewn with bodies and burning vehicles. Strange thing was, they didn't look like clanners. They just looked like people. Regular people. Just dead. "I think you overdid it, Kent." Will wanted to say more. Say how he never really had revenge, and how killing the clanners that had killed his wife had made no difference to him. But he couldn't. He felt his wife's ring on his finger, and he could picture all the dead families in the village of Tenelid. "We need to get after Attitude 2, in case they turn on her. We can't let her fight them alone. We need to get closer." "Copy that," said Azat. "Will, take the lead. Kent, stay near me this time. That's an order." This has been an excerpt from the short story Up Close, written by W.T. Brown. The conclusion of the story can be found in Shrapnel, the official BattleTech magazine, issue 11. And that brings us to the end of our second episode of BungleTech, and woo-wee was it a long one. As a quick reminder, you can find us on Twitter at BungleTechTweet and via email at bungletech@outlook.com. We'd love to hear about your custom game modes and as well if you utilize any feels bad mitigation strategies or rules. Let us know. Until next time, Mech Warrior, good fortunes on the battlefield. Seyla.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.